The first recorded triathlon took place in France in 1902. Comprising of running, cycling and canoeing, it was called Les Trois Sports. By the 1970s and in the US, canoeing was replaced with swimming and the modern version of the sport was born. Over the years, triathlon gained momentum and popularity worldwide, eventually making its Olympic debut at the 2000 Sydney Games. However, it isn't always financially viable for athletes to pursue it as a full-time career, and that's where the Professional Triathletes Organization, or the PTO, comes in. Established in 2020, PTO is an athlete-owned body with big ambitions. It represents triathletes and supports their careers through broadcasts and live streaming, and it hopes to transform it into a mainstream sport. It also earns revenue through the PTO Tour, which launched in 2022 across America, Europe and now Asia. The PTO Tour comes with a major prize purse of millions of dollars for the top-ranking pro triathletes. I'm here in Singapore, the chosen location for the very first PTO Asian Open race. It's a 2-day event comprising of the women's and men's races, with athletes completing a 2-kilometre swim, 80-kilometre cycle and ending with an 18-kilometre run to the finish line.
The PTO stands for Professional Triathletes Organization, and we're very like the ATP in tennis and the PGA Tour in golf. So a membership-based organization, the professional athletes of triathlon got together to further their sport, as happens in so many other sports.
It's an athlete-owned body, at least that's how it's described. What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, so it means we're put together by the athletes themselves to make their sport better. And we're quite unique in that because we launched in 2020 rather than the 1950s and the 1960s, we went out and got investors. And so the organization from a commercial perspective is co-owned by investors and the athletes themselves.
Tough time to have set up 2020 at the start of the pandemic.
Yes, well, in fact, our first funding came 3 weeks before the pandemic set in. So one could say that was amazing timing, actually.
Very lucky. And you yourself are a former triathlete. How has it been transitioning to now a CEO?
Yeah, well, I would say I was a member of the British triathlon team myself nearly 20 years ago now, and I retired at the ripe age of 21 because I didn't have enough talent to win the Olympics, was number one, and more importantly, there wasn't enough money in the sport to sustain a living, or at least in my opinion. And so for me now, nearly 20 years later, helping to solve that problem is a mission as much as it is a career.
Tell us about that. How are you trying to do that?
So triathlon has an unbelievably valuable demographic, right? It's been called the new golf for 10 or 15 years, the demographic of the participant base, so amateur athletes all around the world. It's a very high income sport. It grows wherever there's a middle class economy. But although there's a very valuable fan base, it's very fragmented by the lack of media. And so what we're looking to do is create a cohesive season-long narrative around the sport, and that means having top-tier events like what we've got in Singapore, where the greatest athletes race together, broadcast live around the world to create a fan base, and that ultimately drives money into the sport.
Are there any challenges in getting investors on board?
I won't say it's not a tough macro environment for sure, right? The world has changed, and even in the 4 or 5 years that we've been operating, but sport remains this sort of glimmer of exciting opportunity, and I think we're seeing amazing results across all sport. And so I think as an asset class, there's a lot of growth and a lot of potential.
So how's that been going for the athletes themselves?
I mean, it's been life-changing for many of them, both from an economics perspective and also from media. But we believe that, and we strongly believe that these athletes are some of the greatest of any sport. And we've really seen that the evolution of triathlon is the ultimate athletes. They hold the top of their game in swimming, cycling, and running. And now that they have a professional body behind them, we have tons of opportunities to grow their careers, whether that's through the media exposure we bring or the direct economics of winning prize money. Both men and women will win $100,000 US. So it's sizable amounts, especially considering where the sport was.
Nailing the business strategy behind the sport is integral to take it mainstream.
The challenge really is to take a sport that's fairly niche at the moment, appeals to people that do triathlons, and we want to bring it mainstream. And very simply is sport has pretty much the same criteria or ingredients that you need to be successful, which is about caring who wins over someone else. That's all sport is. And so us, very simply, it's about storytelling, it's making the athletes household names, and therefore have a chance to become mainstream and big stars.
And part of that is money as well. And we're here at a business summit. Can you talk us through this event and what you're hoping to get out of that from an investment standpoint?
Yeah, so we are here, in a sport that's an Olympic sport. It's been under-commercialised, and at the PTO we are going to make this mainstream, make it much more commercial by bringing in media, which we've already done, sponsors, and really through the money required to do that is obviously it goes into prize money. It's an athlete-owned organisation. So the more people we can get involved and invested in the PTO story, the better for us. My main thing is most sports get so insular and they talk to themselves basically, and they assume that everyone outside the meeting rooms know all about the sport and who all the stars are. And actually people have real lives and are busy, and they've got so much content coming at them every single day that you need to be something different to rise above. Everyone in sport generally talks about where are the next generation of stars. My thing has always been, where is the next generation of fans? So adapting to that audience, and therefore you adapt the content to those platforms, is very, very key.
And initially you guys came into this, we were reading about, with an actual business development plan rather than just a couple of investors sort of coughing up the cash. Can you talk us through that?
So our long-term plan is basically to have, copying a lot of other sports, there's nothing groundbreaking new, but have a season-long narrative. That's number one. You've got to have content throughout the year to be able to access people's homes on a regular occurrence. You've got to have the same stars appearing in these races, because like Formula One, you cannot have a Formula One race with different drivers every single race, right? It just wouldn't have that same emotional connection. So we will have these same athletes appearing in these same races all year round that have a point system that lead to a world champion. And at the end of the day, when you can crown a world champion, it has real meaning.